My next guest is Joe Davis. Joe has 40 plus years of experience managing and leading teams, culminating in his position as the head of Boston Consulting Group North America, where he has led a 7,000 plus employee business. Joe is a managing director and senior partner at Boston Consulting Group. He is also the former head of BCG in North America and a member of the firm's executive committee. He oversaw BCG's operation in the US, Canada, and Mexico and was recognized as one of the top 25 consultants of the year in 2011. Personally, he has 4 children and 8 grandchildren, and he's also a board chair for the Center for Inclusion and Equity. Welcome to the podcast, Joe.
Thank you, Dana. Thank you very much. Great to be here.
And we're here to talk about your book, The Generous Leader: 7 Ways to Give of Yourself for Everyone's Gain. But I'll start off with a question that I ask everybody. And you have 2 stories, you said. Times you were in the trenches and managed to crawl out.
Actually, you know what? I just thought of a third one, but I'll keep them all short and tight with my
Okay.
lesson. First one, I was high school person, or maybe,
Mhm.
yeah, I think it's high school, and worked at a restaurant. I was the night manager. I knew the owners pretty well. I didn't think much of the manager. And one time, I thought the owners were calling me and saying, "How is Ron, the manager, doing?" Somehow it came up, and I started saying, that guy is really, I won't even use the word like an idiot, not very good.
Yeah.
My God, we got to do. And eventually, guess what? The manager said, "Joe, this is Ron." I mean,
Mhm.
it was him I was telling was terrible. And I don't know if that's the trouble. I was in the trenches in that I was day to day working, but gosh, it's a moment where, first off, you just don't badmouth others. You
Yeah.
just don't do a period unless you look at it. And what the hell? It was not helpful to anything. Another story I'll tell you. I'll be all quick. When I first started my first full time job after college, at a place called Procter and Gamble. Everyone knows Procter
Mhm.
and Gamble. I started as a sales rep, then I got promoted to sales manager. I had 3 reps working with me. They were 40. I was 25. So, I always
Mhm.
thought, oh my gosh. And
Mhm.
I'd ride with them every 2 weeks and never say a thing. As far as being a manager, I just checked out or I was just kind of AWOL.
Mhm.
Then at the end of the year, I wrote one of the guy's fellows review, put all the things I thought he should work on based on, what I had been trained. And I started going through the review and ticking through these things. And this fellow, 40-year-old customer, I said, "Joe, wait a minute. You ride with me every 2 weeks and you've never told me any of these things. What the
Mhm.
blank?" I
Yeah.
mean, talking about a lesson in, well, learning an early lesson in any form of leadership, whatever you're doing, which is if you're going to give feedback and help people develop, give it to them.
Yeah.
As I left that meeting, my boss said, "Never again write a review where the things you're going to tell the person they haven't heard somewhere along the way."
Mhm.
When I was thinking about the trenches, I don't know what that means, but it was more of a lesson. I had to dig out of that moment, but a real lesson for me. If you're going to be helping develop people, you owe it to them to develop them and not be
Mhm.
mouth
Mhm.
shut. The only other one I'd say is this, I don't know if it's a trench, but when COVID hit, I mean, everybody kind of froze, right? I think we all went into the trenches,
Yeah.
figured out what to do and how you work it, and nobody had any answers, which is fine. But I do remember that one lesson I learned through that time, this time as a more senior leader, was the importance and the power and the desire of people just to connect personally and deeply.
Mhm.
Even by Zoom, it's fine. We didn't see each other and showing a little emotion, it just brought all of us, quote unquote. Now, it was a hard time, I won't say that, but I was told many times, just the fact that you would get on these Zooms, connect with us, be vulnerable, it lifted us all up to say, okay, let's
Yeah.
make it through. So I don't know if those are exactly trenches, but 3 good lessons. Don't
Mhm.
badmouth people, especially in front of them when you don't know. If you're going to give feedback, give it. And finally, the teams you work with and the people you work with really want to connect with you.
Yeah, those are important lessons to remember as a leader.
Yeah,
Um,
of any sort.
yeah, yeah, definitely. And, I've had a few business leaders on the podcast before, and I think, reading books from business about leadership that are outside education can help educational leaders and those who are managing teams. So we'll talk about your book, in a moment. I do want to talk a little bit about just getting started with Boston Consulting Group, and how has it evolved in the past 37 years? I mean, the short version
Yeah,
would
right.
be.
Yeah, you had mentioned to me when we did a pre-call, someone went on for a half hour or so. Well, 37 years, I could go on all day. Um, well, how do I answer that? I mean, it's interesting, maybe because I try to think of principles that would apply to anybody. I mean, you get a new job like that, and of course, you wonder, do I really belong here?
Yeah.
I think if you're whether you're a teacher, whether you get promoted to principal, whether you get promoted, do I belong here? Do I belong in this role? It's not quite imposter syndrome. That's quite a heavy word. But even
Hmm.
do I fit? Do I belong? And the evolution and BCG, like many places, is always pushing us and always challenging you.
Hmm.
So I think one important thing is, just for me, keep my head down, do the best at the job you can, learn as much
Hmm.
as you can. At any time I moved into any new role across my BCG roles, it was just very powerful and helped you avoid this quote unquote imposter
Hmm.
syndrome. Now the career's been great. I don't want to go too much in it. I served clients for many years. I spent a lot of time in retail and consumer, started a public sector business. Then, as you read, and thank you very much, did a number of different leadership roles, which was, each one of those leadership roles again applies to anything you do. You're always being challenged. You're always
Hmm.
learning something new. And even when you think you got it all down, something new pops up, or
Hmm.
some kind of
Hmm.
experience or addressing a situation that you didn't imagine. As long as I think, you said we'll talk about the book, or at least the themes in the book. As long as you do any of all of those, understanding your role as a leader is to, inspire, motivate, and help others to perform at their best, doing that with your heart,
Hmm.
you pretty much can make it through.
Hmm.
I don't know if that's what you meant. I wasn't going to go through every job I had, but some of and it's been a great career. I am leaving at the end of the year. It's been a fun run.
Hmm. Hmm. So I'm just going to give a little background from your website about your book, The Generous Leader. So it says that you tell a story about a performance review from early in your career, that you were told you were not the best person solving in a vacuum, but in collaboration with others, uh, people can learn to solve any challenge and also make change happen. And change leadership is something that's important in schools if we're going to move the needle forward, right? Whether it's academics, behaviors, attendance. I mean, there's all those buckets that people look at during school leadership. So you've learned early on in your career through a mentor that you were a person who could connect with people. So you talk to us a little bit about why the book's called The Generous Leader, and also just having that relational leadership, servant leadership.
Yeah, since you started with that story, let me use that as a pivot. I mean,
Mhm.
actually, it's interesting. Yes, I had a mentor, and he said, Joe, if I put you and this other person in a room, four walls, no door, no windows, and
Mhm.
give you the toughest problem, or a very, very, very tough problem, you'll probably not get out, and you don't get out of the room until you solve it. You might not get out of the room. This other guy will get out of the room every time. So,
Uh-huh.
ooh,
Uh-huh.
that's harsh. But he said, however, once you're out and we say, okay, now let's get this done, drive the change, make it happen, he'll never get it done, and
Mhm.
you'll get it done every time. And, this to your point, whether it's, whatever role you have,
Mhm.
or even in leadership and driving change. I mean, for me, my quote unquote superpower, according to him at that time, was connecting, understanding what I didn't know,
Mhm.
surrounding me with people who could fill those gaps,
Mhm.
collaborating well with people, not stuck in my own head with I have all the answers. And that can apply, I just think of well, that surely can apply in leadership roles within schools. It doesn't
Mhm.
matter where you're a leader. And also, I think even as a teacher, we all have, my mom was a school teacher, my daughter's a school teacher.
Mhm.
Everyone has their own quote unquote superpower or uniqueness they bring to that classroom.
Mhm.
If you're lucky enough to have someone really give you the feedback on this is what you're really great at, grab it and take advantage of it. Really, really work on that.
Mhm.
Um, Now, the book itself, yeah, I really, over the years, I've just come to believe that the best way to motivate and inspire people is that they see their leaders. First off, the leaders see them as humans. The
Mhm.
leader, meaning not just cogs in a wheel,
Yeah.
that the leader shows some of their own humanity. And I think, given first off technology, starting with the BlackBerry right through to COVID, social media,
Mhm.
work life is blurred. And I don't think, I mean, you're probably neither of us are better in some office in a tall business office. People
Mhm.
work from all kinds of places now, and
Sure.
you have to bring, and they want to bring their real self to work, their human self to work. So I actually think that it's very, very critical for leaders of today and the future. The Jack Welch, I know he was a
Hmm.
superstar leader, but tough guy approach doesn't cut it anymore. And what
Yeah.
I like, the sentence I use is that I think a generous leader is some who gives of themselves freely
Hmm.
without expectation of personal benefit, so others
Hmm.
can develop, grow, and thrive at their full potential. That
Hmm.
inspires others. And of course, if everyone's performing at their full potential, it's going to benefit you, even if you don't make
Hmm.
it the primary reason.
Hmm. Hmm. And also when people are leading a classroom, for example, like you said, your mom was a teacher, your daughter's a teacher, how can they apply this type of leadership about not being stuck in your head, and also motivated and inspiring? They might be listening to this episode at a time like it's this lull during the school year, a long time before a break, or you're preparing for the end of the year or for state assessments. How can they inspire when they're feeling like drained or burnt out from the job?
Well, oh my, that's interesting because um, I mean, we all get drained and burned out
Yeah.
sometimes,
Yeah.
but I assume if you're doing a people job like that, which mine was too, you have to like people a little bit. So somehow you're finding out how to get the
Yeah.
energy from whether you're a kindergarten teacher or a high school teacher. I think some of the that's it. Yeah. I mean, and then I think the more you in the midst of it, as you said, all the worksheets or whatever one is doing, the more you work to connect with your students, because I think that's at the core
Hmm.
why you're there, isn't it? I mean, I'm sure you want a paycheck, but I think you pick that path to get a paycheck because you
Yeah.
want to connect and grow and inspire, younger people. Um, I think as long as you always come back to that as best you can, and then I think do work to connect personally. I mean, be willing to show a bit. I mean, now if you're talking about kindergarten, right, it depends on what, but be willing to show a bit of your own humanity, and
Hmm.
I understand that's context specific because when you're dealing with children, sometimes there's different situations.
Hmm.
If they're 14 years old, they have a different thing going on in their head and their life than you have a 30-year-old, but they all are sitting there looking, yearning for someone to connect with them. And in this
Hmm.
case, what are you doing? You only are growing and developing somebody. That is your job. Yeah, the other
Hmm.
thing I was going to say is I just think one element of really leading, being a servant leader, or whatever, or leading with your heart is this whole thing of really listening to understand what somebody else knows that you don't know, et cetera. And that's maybe a little different in teaching, but everyone I talked to in any leadership role was really
Hmm.
good at asking questions and listening to what the answer is and really
Yeah.
working to learn what is in that person's head. And
Yeah.
gosh, if you're a teacher and someone's saying blah, blah, blah. Well, do they know something that now is a new insight? Or what are they missing if I'm trying to teach them something that, oh, I see, they're thinking that way. If I put my brain together with them, we can
Hmm.
come up with this type of thing. I think that now, whether when you're in the most doldrums of the school year, I don't
Yeah.
know, but I do think this whole idea of connecting with people, and the best way to do it is asking and listening to the answer. Don't just, ask them and then assume your answer, which imagine a teacher's got to be a little bit careful, right? Because hey, I'm doing the
Hmm.
lesson plan. I know how to teach.
Sure.
I know what to tell you. Okay, but that's what are they thinking, not what are you thinking? You want them to
Hmm.
learn, not just you spew. Sorry, I'm lecturing a little bit there, but
No, and that's exactly what we want. We want it to be more student centered, right? We don't want the teacher to be the sage on the stage all the time. And also, when a principal is leading a staff meeting, we want to hear
oh,
from the experts in the building, right? We don't want a leader who's going to think they know it all, right? And they know how to fix all the problems in the building, right? The principal's there to lead the staff, to encourage them, to build them up, but having that collective efficacy is really
oh
important.
yeah, no. If you talk about principals or superintendents,
Hmm.
absolutely these principles apply. And
Hmm.
my mom, sorry to get so personal, but she went through a number of principals. Some of them were
Yeah.
very good people, some of them were not very good people,
Hmm.
and that really hurt her. I watch her as a 14-year-old bring it home, and that principal didn't spend the time to get into a room and say, okay, what is everybody else thinking? What do I need to do? They wanted to spew their facts or their messages
Yeah.
or whatever. And people don't listen and connect if you just want to talk at them. I mean,
Hmm.
obvious statement. But all you have to do is ask a few questions and listen, and you start to build a relationship with people.
Yeah.
Whether you're pressed or not for time, you can still. The other thing I was going to say is interesting you made that comment because I do think even in business, the last thing you want, well, not the last thing, there's a lot of things you don't want, but you don't want to be a leader who surrounds themselves with one or two, of their staff, and that's
Hmm.
all of your insight. So I
Hmm.
like what your point about, if you're having a staff meeting, bring someone from the front desk, bring someone that's in the classroom, bring someone that's working on the playground with the kids. Bring all those different people in the room if you're trying to solve or talk about something and get all their
Hmm.
perspectives,
Yeah.
or at
Yeah.
least
And
give them a chance to contribute, maybe I should say.
yeah, and I think that's a great idea. I mean, there's staff committees in many schools, but a lot of them are just involving certified staff, the teachers and the counselors. Not many of the committees involve, the playground paras or
Well, they know
cafeteria workers, right? I mean,
they
that's
know how the
important
kids
to
are
include.
feeling. They see them away with no flow. That's really interesting. Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, I think it's not so bad sometimes to involve. I would tell you I interviewed a bunch of business leaders for the book, and every single one of these leaders talked about how they went down multiple levels to the
Uh-huh.
person at the front line to really learn what was going on. All the
Yeah.
best leaders did that.
Hmm.
They didn't accept whatever their chief of staff said only. And of course, you listen to your chief of staff, but or your vice principal or whatever it might be.
Hmm. Hmm. So I wanted to discuss an article that you wrote this past May. It's about being an empathetic leader, the importance of being an empathetic leader. I'll link it in the show notes. And in that article, you talk a little bit about, town hall meetings during the pandemic, but also the importance of being empathetic and also having vulnerability, right? Or actually saying, I don't know. I mean, um, how can people apply this in schools or districts, especially if there are numerous challenges and uh, they want to bring more people
Yeah.
into the mix, but they aren't sure how to do it, right? They might kind of be that manager type, unwilling to kind of share the distributive leadership, but really
or
kind of
or some of
learning.
their well, okay, yeah, well, unwilling to share some of the distributed leadership. Okay, but that is something you typically need to learn over
Yeah,
time. I
yeah,
will just
yeah,
say that
yeah,
you can stay in your role and not move to other roles, but you need to learn that. What you need to do is figure out how do you do it, which is your question.
yeah,
How
yeah,
especially if I'm not comfortable. Well, you started with on the vulnerability side. I mean, just this does go that people do want to see that leader as human. It just
yeah,
doesn't matter. You have to do that nowadays. And so if you're going to be human, you can't be perfect. You got to
yeah,
be a little bit authentic. You're not going to be perfect. You have to show sometimes some vulnerability. Now,
yeah.
I'm not saying get up in front of a staff meeting and cry your eyes out every meeting. I mean,
Hmm.
if that's your thing, that's great. I actually cry quite a bit. But you commented, I don't know. I'll just tell a story. There was a colleague of mine who asked him about what I say, when did he cross his line and show a little more vulnerability?
Yeah.
And he used to be afraid to say, I don't know. So if he had a team doing work and he could tell they were stuck and they were going to ask him for
Hmm.
help and what he thought they should do, if he didn't know the answer, he would leave the room before he'd
Hmm.
have to say, I don't know. How's that for productive? I mean, just and one day he thought, oh gosh, I'm being crazy. So he said, everybody, I don't know either. And it was like
Hmm.
this burst of it. Oh, you don't know? Oh, none of us know? Okay, then they all got to work solving it together.
Uh-huh.
You show a little, whatever version of it is for you, and I can talk about that in a minute. You said how a vulnerability, you allow others to move past their fears, their roadblocks, there and get things done better. Oh, the boss said he doesn't know, so I can admit I don't know. Oh, wow, okay, let me, and you'd start to be productive. Now the hows, a couple of things. I had several thoughts. One leader said she was always watching whenever other leaders shared a little bit of their human self, and she wasn't going to
Hmm.
copy them. How did they do it? How did it receive? She just learned
Hmm.
from what others were doing. Another good friend of mine said, if you're afraid to be a little bit vulnerable or human, just think back in your life when you did share some vulnerability or it happened. You made it, you're through,
Hmm.
it worked, it
Hmm.
didn't kill you, and how did that feel? And so, be willing to, and this is the important part, just take that I don't know is a pretty small step. For him, it was a big step, but just be willing
Hmm.
to take whatever step it might be. I mean, someone told me these days are gone now, but colleague of mine said, well, this was like 20 years ago. She was a woman. her boss was a woman, and her boss
Hmm.
would have on the calendar, go pick up Sam, her son.
Hmm.
He said back in those days, you didn't say you had to go get your child because
Hmm.
you were at work. You didn't have a child, of course. So to actually put her child to the reason she had to leave work early to put that on the calendar and everyone could see the calendar. She said that she was blown away at the vulnerability that shared.
Hmm.
That's as a woman in that time. So
Hmm.
there's simple ways you can signal your own humanity that should be very powerful to enabling others to move past their roadblocks.
Hmm.
But if you're sitting there stuck in your head that you have to always be right,
Yeah.
well, then you better work on that. So that doesn't matter
Mhm.
what field you're in, because you're not always right. You can't know everything.
Yeah.
You can't.
Yeah. Yeah. So important to remember. In general, just from your many years in leadership, for those listening on the podcast in school leadership or moving into school leadership or just a classroom leader, what are some key takeaways just from leading business about just taking those steps to get your students or your staff moving in the right direction while being vulnerable and while being empathetic.
Well, I think the most important thing when you say that is this whole thing about asking and listening.
Mm-hmm.
If you're trying, you don't know whatever. If the thing people are stuck, you don't know why. Ask
Mm-hmm.
that question, help them bring it out. It's the safest thing. Now you have to listen too. So that
Yeah.
takes a little bit of humility because you may learn something you thought you knew and it's new. So, but if you don't even ask, you don't even get there. So when
Mm-hmm.
whatever, I mean, gosh, think about it. If I just think about, I'm the board chair of my college. Just think if the teacher at the end of every class, or professor, I guess, well, did you all understand me and did you learn anything? Now
Mm-hmm.
that's a lot of vulnerability, but wow, just think if she gave him 10 minutes to give her feedback,
Yeah.
her or him feedback. Think how powerful. Now, I'm not advocating that necessarily, but why not once in a while? That's not the kind of ask, but that I think is, I think the thing to remember is the people you're teaming with, you're working with, they are humans and they
Yeah.
need to and want to be humans. That's number one. They're not, if you're the superintendent, it's all teachers out there. They're actually people trying to inspire kids.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they are. So don't, and then engage them. Sorry, I've said ask and listen 4 times. I'll stop saying it. But when you say what's one of that's to me the number one thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But it's not hard. It's not hard.
Yeah.
It takes some vulnerability to admit you may not know everything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I mean, I think like one of those things I'm hearing a lot is that listening, right? And not being so far removed. Like if you're a superintendent, a lot of staff members in a district think, oh, that person's in the ivory tower, right? And they're, sometimes you see them at schools, but it's like the person seems almost unapproachable. But like if you take the time to listen to the teachers or participate in meetings at schools with staff and really, get to know what's making them tick or what are some of the issues in those individual schools, like you said, those are those key takeaways.
Yeah, and that doesn't school or business. I mean,
Yeah.
a leader who goes and eats in the cafeteria as
Hmm.
opposed to their own office in the quote unquote ivory tower is gonna have a
Yeah.
much better sense of what's going on than the one that sits in their office. And
Yeah.
it's not that hard to go.
Hmm.
Hey, even go eat in the classroom with the kids. Well, I don't know. It's not. You'll learn some stuff and you'll have fun.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast that you are transitioning to more of a consultant role at the end of this calendar year. You've done a lot of podcasts, including the Principal Center, where I first heard about your work. So, in terms of consulting, what are some of the things that you already speak on in terms of keynotes, and how would you be able to maybe work with schools in terms of end of the year convocations or just district keynotes throughout the year?
I've never had that question. Well, yeah, let me say one thing. I don't know if I'm going to consult because I've been a consultant for many years, and why would I
Hmm.
leave? But
Yeah.
coaching is
Yeah.
a different
Coaching.
thing.
Yeah.
Coaching, sharing wisdom or experiences, which you hope is
Yeah.
wisdom, I'm all the more happy to do. Well, to that point, I think I mentioned to you, I spoke to a set of superintendents and school heads in Eastern Washington. It was my cousin, and he said he'd come and talk to us. And
Hmm.
the principles of leadership, that group, as you said, no different than my colleagues. I mean, they got to lead a group of people. They have all these things coming at them all the time. They knew they needed to connect with each other and with their people. So that's, I mean, that is, I think, if you just ask what kind, I mean, that's for sure something I can talk about and like to talk about, whether it's, business environments or nonprofit or academics.
Hmm. Hmm.
That,
And
sure, I answered your question very well. I haven't thought about that question much.
no, but people are welcome to reach out to you, and
Yeah.
you said you'll be available more for districts that would like you to bring you in, kind of around that time frame the podcast episode will drop. But we've had a great conversation today about just leadership, management versus leadership, being an empathetic leader, and a little bit about your book, The Generous Leader. Out of everything we've talked about, what's one thing you'd like listeners to remember?
Oh, that's interesting. I will say what you just said. There is a big difference between management
Yeah.
and leadership. I'll just pick up. I mean, I don't want to and that's where, a little bit of humanity, a little bit of vulnerability, asking and listening, those type of things. Then
Hmm.
you're inspiring and motivating people when you bring them into the world, as opposed to just managing them.
Yeah.
And that's very hard to understand. There are people who are great managers.
Hmm.
That's
Hmm.
not necessarily a great leader. So let me leave it that way. Move yourself to a real leader who connects, works hard to connect with your people, not just manage them to, whatever timesheets and end of year reviews.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, really important to remember. Where can people connect with you and find you online?
But well, of course, LinkedIn. It's very,
Hmm.
people use LinkedIn, and I do actually now follow the messages there, the LinkedIn, and I do follow Facebook, although that's not as good as a messaging tool. And then I have a website, joedavis.com, and the messages do get there. I would give you my BCG email, except I'm leaving in 70 days, so it's not very good to give you.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, in any case, I'll make sure listeners have those links in the show notes. And if they'd like to connect with you to hear more about your experience or have you speak to their school or district, they're free to reach out. Well, thank you so much for being on the Out of the Trenches podcast. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, Dana. This was a lot of fun. Thank you.